Welcome back. It's good to have you here again, in this space where time moves a little slower, where the outside world can wait for a moment. I know the day may have been long. Perhaps you've carried more than you should have. Perhaps the hours have stacked one upon another until everything felt too heavy. That's all right. You don't need to carry anything now. Tonight, I invite you on a journey. Not away, but inward. To a place that exists outside of ordinary timer. Small bookshop in London. On a November evening, long ago, where rain falls gently and stories wait patiently on the shelves. There's no hurry here. There's nothing you need to do. Just be. Just listen. Just allow this story to wrap around you like a warm embrace on a cold night. So if you can, find a comfortable position. Allow your body to sink wherever it rests, in bed, in a chair, wherever you are. Let the weight settle. You're safe here, and as your body settles into this quietness, allow your mind to quiet as well. Thoughts may come, that's natural, but let them pass like clouds on an autumn sky. You don't need to hold them, just watch them go, because now I'm going to take you to a place, a small refuge on a rainy night, where stories live and wait, where time bends gently, where something you didn't even know you were looking for might be waiting for you. Come with me. The rain began before nightfall. Not suddenly, it's never sudden in November in London. First came the promise of it, hanging in the grey, thick air since morning. Then the first hesitant drops, as if testing the world's receptiveness. And then, when afternoon began to curve toward darkness, the rain finally surrendered to its own nature and fell. It fell on the sloping roofs of Cornhill, on the ancient stones of the streets, on windows that had witnessed 100 years of London weather. The sound was constant now, not loud, never loud, but present, a whisper that filled the spaces between thoughts. On this narrow street, where buildings lean into each other like old friends sharing secrets, a small bookshop glows against the gathering darkness. The light comes from within amber, trembling, alive. Gold lettering crosses the window, faded at the edges but still readable. Ashford and Son. Booksellers, Est.1847. Smoke rises from an invisible chimney, drawing lazy spirals against the dark velvet sky. The gas lamps along the street begin to light, one by one, painting circles of golden light on the wet stones. Fog gathers in the spaces between the lights, turning the night into something soft and undefined. There's a particular quality to the quietness of this hour. The city is changing rhythm from the frenzy of day to the slower breathing of night. Carriages pass less frequently now. Footsteps on the stones become occasional, distant. Even the rain seems to understand, falling more considerately, as if not wanting to disturb something sacred that's emerging with the darkness. A bell echoes from somewhere nearby 6 chimes that roll through the narrow streets and dissolve into the rain. The sound seems to come from very far away and very close at the same time, the way old memories do. The bookshop waits, squeezed between a tailor's establishment and a tea merchant's storefront. Its window is small, but through the glass you can see shelves rising toward the ceiling, each one bowing gently under the weight of leather spines and cloth-bound volumes. There's something inviting about that light, something that suggests refuge, something that says, here you can rest. And there's someone inside. A middle-aged man with grey in his hair and lines around his eyes that speak of years spent reading under dim light. Thomas Ashford. He came early this evening, not for customers, but for company, the kind that only old books can offer, the kind that asks nothing and gives everything. Silence, presence, the weight of other lives lived and recorded. He turns the key in the lock. The sound is crisp in the damp, arid, definitive click that marks the transition between outer world and inner sanctuary. The door opens, and the bell above it sings a clear, single note that seems to float in the air longer than it should, as if reluctant to dissolve back into silence. Thomas steps inside and closes the door behind him. The sound of rain becomes muffled. The noise of carriage wheels on stone disappears. What remains is a different silence, not absence of sound, but presence of quietness. Something you can almost touch, something that embraces. He breathes in deeply. Slowly, the air inside the shop smells of old paper and beeswax, of coal smoke and that particular mustiness that comes from housing stories for generations. It's a smell he knows as well as his own breath, a smell that means home. Though he lives elsewhere, his shoulders drop. Something in him that was tense, so tense he hadn't even noticed, begins to release. The day can remain outside. Here, only this moment matters. He hangs his coat on the stand near the door. Water drips from the hem, forming a small dark circle on the wooden floor. His hands are cold, fingers stiff from the walk through the rain. He flexes them once, twice, watching the movement as if they're not quite his own. Small gestures, small rituals, things that anchor us when everything else seems adrift. The fireplace at the back of the shop waits for him, dark mouth filled with yesterday's ashes. Thomas kneels before it, feeling his knees protest slightly. He's not young anymore. None of us are. But there's comfort in repetition, in doing the same things the same way, in building structure from habit. He places kindling in a careful pattern crossed, then parallel, then crossed again. He adds coal from the scuttle, piece by piece. He strikes a match that flares in sulphurous bright light, momentarily jarring against the softness of the shop. The flame licks at the kindling, timid at first, then grows bolder. Soon the coal begins to glow, and warmth starts to push back against the November chill. Thomas stands, brushing his hands against his trousers, leaving small smudges of ash. He watches the flames for a moment. There's something hypnotic about fire, the way it moves. Never the same from one second to the next, always changing but always itself. The shadows it casts dance across the walls, making the books seem almost alive, their titles flickering in and out of readability. He lights the lamp on the counter near the front of the shop. The wick catches, and golden light spills across the mahogany surface, illuminating the ledger that rests there open, pages filled with careful script recording, sales and orders. A pen rests in its holder, nib pointed upward. The glass shade of the lamp is etched with a pattern of leaves and vines, and the light filtering through it paints delicate shadows on the ceiling. The rain continues its steady rhythm. Thomas can hear it clearly now that he's stopped moving, each drop distinct for a moment before blending into the greater chorus. The sound has weight, presence. It fills the spaces between thoughts, between breaths, between the beats of his heart. He moves to the window and looks out at Cornhill. A few people hurry past, heads bent, collars raised against the cold and damp. A hansom cab rolls by, its wheels throwing up small sprays of water that catch the lamplight and fall back to earth like scattered coins. The street is old. These buildings stood here when Victoria was young, when gaslight was new and remarkable. Thomas finds comfort in the continuity of Ith, the same stones walked on by different feet, the same rain falling on different heads, the same stories told in different voices. The city changes and doesn't change, all at once. He turns from the window and begins to walk along the first row of shelves. His fingers trail across the spines as he passes, feeling the texture of leather and cloth, the raised bands on some volumes, the smooth, worn surfaces of others. It's a gesture he makes without thinking, like running your hand through a child's hair or touching the shoulder of an old friend. Each book is a door. Each one contains hours of someone's life, the author's, the reader's, even his own. The shop is small, barely 20 feet wide and 30 deep, but it feels larger at night. Shadows gather in the corners, and the shelves seem to extend farther than they do during the day. Mystery accumulates in the dark spaces between the lamps. He reaches the poetry section and pauses. This shelf holds volumes by Wordsworth, Keats, Tennyson, and others whose names are known, and some whose names have been forgotten by everyone except people like Thomas, who keep their books on shelves. He pulls out a slim volume bound in green cloth. The pages are edged with gold that has faded to a dull brass color. He opens it carefully. The spine creaks, softly a sound he knows well, the gentle protest of pages that haven't been turned in a long time. He reads the first lines of a poem about autumn and memory. The words settle into him quietly. Poetry does that creeps in through the side door of understanding rather than demanding entrance at the front. He closes the book and returns it to its place, his fingers lingering on the spine for a moment before letting go. There's resistance in letting go. There always is. But there's also satisfaction in knowing the book will be here tomorrow, and the day after, waiting for whoever needs it. The fire crackles softly behind him. The rain whispers against the windows. Time moves slowly here, thickly, like honey from a jar. And there's something comforting in that slowness, in this refusal to hurry. The world outside can rush. Here you can simply ... be. As he turns toward the back of the shop, something catches his Arja book lying at an angle on one of the lower shelves, as if it had been pulled partway out and left there. He frowns slightly. He prides himself on order, on everything having its place. He crosses to the shelf and picks up the book. It's bound in faded red cloth, the spine nearly bare of lettering. He can't remember ever noticing it before, though it must have been here for years, perhaps decades. There's something about its position, that deliberate angle, that makes him hesitate, as if the book had been waiting, as if it knew he would come. He carries it to the counter where the light is better and opens it. The title page reads Letters to a Friend with no author's name, only the initial A, published 1885. The frontispiece shows an engraving of a country house surrounded by gardens that seem to extend into infinity. There's something about this image, a dreamlike quality, a sense of distance that makes him look longer than he intends. He turns to the first letter, dated March 1875, and begins to read. The writer describes a winter morning frost on the windows, steam rising from a cup of tea, that particular quality of light that comes only in December. The details are precise, almost tactile. Thomas can feel the cold air, see the frost patterns, smell the bergamot in the tea. This is not merely description. This is memory made tangible, offered like a gift to whoever finds these pages. He continues reading, standing at the counter with the book open before him. The letter speaks of small rituals, lighting the fire each morning, arranging books on a shelf, walking the same path through a garden. The writer found comfort in repetition, in the way certain actions become prayers when repeated with attention. Thomas understands this. His own days are built on such rituals, unlocking the shop, lighting the lamps, running his fingers across familiar spines. These gestures anchor him, give shape to hours that might otherwise drift away unmeasured. There's salvation in routine. There's grace in habit. The clock on the wall ticks steadily. It's nearly 7 now. The night is deepening. Thomas should attend to the day's correspondence. He knows, but something about these letters holds him. He turns the page. This letter is dated June 1875 and speaks of loneliness, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet variety that accumulates over years of living alone, of coming home to empty rooms, of having thoughts with no one to share them with. The writer describes sitting by a fire, watching shadows play across the walls, wondering if anyone else in the world was experiencing this exact same moment of solitary peace. The honesty of it catches in Thomas's chest like a small hook. He recognizes this. God, how he recognizes this. The evenings in his own apartment, the empty chair where Margaret used to sit, the way silence can feel alive sometimes, like something with weight and texture. He sets the book down for a moment and presses his hand against the desk, grounding himself. The wood is cool and solid beneath his palm. Outside, the rain has softened to a whisper. The fire pops quietly in its grate. He picks up the book again, his fingers trembling slightly as he turns the page. The next letter describes a visit to a bookshop, not this one, but one somewhere near Charing Cross. The writer had entered during a rainstorm much like tonight's, shaking water from their coat, stamping their feet on the mat inside the door. The proprietor had looked up from his work and smiled a small gesture, barely noticeable, but in that moment the writer had felt seen, acknowledged, welcomed. Thomas knows that smile. He's given it to countless customers over the years, that brief acknowledgement that said, "You are safe here, take your time, the world can wait." He'd never thought of it as particularly meaningful, but reading the writer's description of its impact, he understands differently now. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight. Sometimes a look, a nod, a moment of attention can change the entire course of someone's day. We don't know the power we have over others. We can't know, but perhaps that's why kindness matters, because we never fully know what our gestures might mean to someone who's struggling silently. The letter continues. The writer had browsed for an hour, running their fingers along spines, pulling volumes at random, reading opening lines and closing paragraphs. Eventually, they'd purchased a slim book of poetry by an unknown author. The cover was plain blue cloth, unadorned, nothing special. But that night, reading by lamplight in their rooms, the writer had encountered a poem that stopped them cold. It was about loss and memory and the way certain moments never really leave us, just recede into the background of our lives, waiting to resurface when we least expect them. The poem had described a woman standing at a window, watching rain, thinking of someone who was gone. The details were so specific, so precise, that the writer had begun to weep. Not because the poem was sad, though it was, but because it recognized something true. It gave shape to a feeling the writer had carried for years, but had never been able to name. Thomas reads the passage 3 times. His throat feels tight. The words seem to reach across the decades and touch something in him he'd kept carefully protected. He thinks of Margaret. Thinks of the day Edward came to tell him she was gone. Thinks of how he'd dropped the book he was holding and heard the binding crack. That sound still lives in him, waiting in quiet moments to resurface and remind him that some losses never really heal. They just become part of the landscape you navigate daily. You learn to walk around them. You learn to carry the weight. But they never go away, not completely. He closes the book for a moment and walks to the window. He presses his palm against the cold glass, feeling the chill seep into his skin. The street outside is nearly empty now. The lamps throw pools of amber light onto the wet cobblestones. Somewhere in the distance, he can hear the faint clatter of a carriage, the sound muffled by rain and fog. There's a loneliness in London at night that's different from other places. It's a loneliness that contains multitudes, the millions of people living their lives in rooms throughout the city, each in their own small universe of worry and hope and weariness. You're alone, but you're not alone. There's comfort in that, and also a deep strangeness. When he returns to the desk, he opens the book again and continues reading. The next letter is dated September 1875 and speaks of autumn, the way light changed as the year turned, becoming thinner, more precious. The writer described walking through woods where leaves fell like amber rain, collecting some to press between the pages of books as small monuments to moments that would otherwise be lost. Thomas smiles at this. He'd done the same thing as a boy, though he'd forgotten until now. There are probably leaves still pressed in books upstairs, in the unused rooms where boxers from his childhood sit gathering dust. The thought stirs something in him, not quite nostalgia, but a recognition of continuity, of the way certain impulses persist across time and distance, connecting people who will never meet. As he turns another page, the bell above the shop door chimes unexpectedly. Thomas looks up, startled. An elderly woman stands in the doorway, rain dripping from her umbrella, her face half hidden by shadows. She looks around uncertainly, as if surprised to find the shop open at this hour. "I'm sorry," she says, her voice soft and slightly breathless. "I saw the light. I wondered if you might still be open." Thomas sets the book aside and stands. "Come in," he says. "Please." Out of the rain, she steps inside, closing the umbrella carefully and setting it by the door. Water pools on the floor around its tip. She's perhaps 70, dressed in a dark coat that has seen many seasons, her grey hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her hands, when she removes her gloves, are thin and marked with age spots. "I'm looking for a book," she says, almost apologetically. "I've been to several shops, but no one seems to have it. It's rather old. I thought perhaps... ... Single quotes, she trails off, looking around at the shelves with an expression Thomas recognizes, hope mixed with the expectation of disappointment. "Tell me about it," Thomas says gently. She describes a collection of folk tales, Scottish, published sometime in the 1870s or 1880s. Her grandmother had read from it when she was a child. She could still remember the stories, or fragments of them, selkies and standing stones, girls who danced with the fairies, and men who sailed to the edge of the world. She'd been searching for a copy for months now, wanting to read those stories again, to hear her grandmother's voice in the words. Thomas listens, watching her face as she speaks. There's something in her expression of vulnerability, a need that goes beyond simply wanting a book. This is about connection, about reaching back across the years to touch something precious that had been lost. And he understands. God, how he understands. Because isn't this what we all do, in one way or another? Aren't we all trying to recover something? A moment, a person, a sense of belonging that somehow slipped from our hands when we weren't paying attention. "Wait here," he says. He goes to the section where he keeps Scottish literature and folklore, running his finger along the spines. He has a memory of seeing such a book, though he can't quite place when or where. It's how it works sometimes in the shop books appear when they're needed, as if they have their own wills, their own sense of timing. And then their third shelf from the bottom, wedged between two larger volumes. He pulls it out carefully. The cover is dark green cloth, faded but intact. Gold lettering on the spine, Tales of the Northern Isles. He opens it and checks the publication date, 1878. He brings it back to the counter and sets it down in the lamplight. The woman's breath catches when she sees it. She reaches out with one trembling hand and touches the cover, then opens it slowly. Her eyes fill with tears. "This is it," she whispers. "This is the one." I remember the illustrations look. Here, the selkie. She turns pages carefully, reverently, as if handling something sacred. And perhaps she is. Because what are books if not vessels for moments that would otherwise disappear completely? What are they if not bridges across time, connecting who we were with who we are, connecting the dead with the living, connecting loneliness with loneliness until, for a moment, no one is alone. They talk for a few more minutes. She tells him about her grandmother, about the house in the highlands where she'd spent childhood summers, about the sound of the sea and the smell of peat fires. Thomas wraps the book carefully in brown paper and ties it with string. She pays him, thanks him 3 times, and leaves, holding the package close to her chest as she steps back into the rain. The bell chimes as the door closes. The shop feels very quiet in her absence. Thomas stands at the counter for a long moment, watching her figure disappear into the fog. Then he returns to his desk and picks up the book of letters again. And as he reads, something in him softens, because he understands now in a way he didn't before. This is the reason. This is why he keeps the shop, why he spends his evenings here among books that most people have forgotten. For moments like this, when the right book finds the right person at exactly the right time, when connection happens across time and distance, when something lost is, impossibly, found again. We don't live alone, he realizes, even when we think we do. We walk through a web of connections, some visible, most not. Each kindness, each story shared, each moment of genuine attention adds something to the world, makes it a little less lonely, a little more bearable. He reads for another hour, moving through the seasons. The writer describes summer afternoons in a garden, winter evenings by the fire, spring mornings when light returns slowly to the world. The letters aren't chronological, and the writer never explains who they were writing to, never names the friend who was meant to receive these words. But there's an intimacy to them, a sense that these are not performances, but genuine attempts at connection, at saying true things that might otherwise remain unspoken. One letter describes a morning spent watching birds at a feeder. The writer had sat perfectly still for an hour, observing the hierarchy among the different species, the way some birds bullied others away, while some shared space generously. It was such a small thing, an hour, watching birds, but the writer had found it endlessly fascinating, had seen in it patterns that reflected human behavior. Thomas thinks about this as he reads. How much we miss, he thinks, when we move too quickly, when we fail to pay attention to what's actually present. The writer of these letters had understood that slowness was not the opposite of productivity, but perhaps its truest form, that real understanding came from sustained attention, from the willingness to sit with something long enough to see beyond its surface. There's wisdom in that, there's grace, and there's also a sadness, because how many of us have that time now? How many of us allow ourselves to simply be, simply observe, simply exist without the constant need to do, produce, achieve? The fire has burned low. Thomas adds more coal from the scuttle, and the flames brighten briefly before settling again. The clock shows 9:30. He should go home soon, but the letters hold him. There's one more, he sees. One last. He turns to the final pages. The last letter is dated December 1877, and the tone is different, quieter, more reflective, touched with something that feels like farewell, though the writer never says so explicitly. They write about endings and beginnings, about the way life circles back on itself, about the comfort found in small rituals and familiar places, We are all walking through this life together, the writer says, though we may not always realize it. Every kindness, every story shared, every moment of genuine connection adds something to the world, makes it a little less lonely, a little more bearable. I have tried to live by this belief, and I hope I have succeeded, at least in some small way. Remember me kindly, if you remember me at all. Your friend always, A. Thomas closes the book slowly. The shop is very quiet now. The rain has stopped entirely, leaving behind only the occasional drip from the eaves. He sits for a long time with his hands resting on the book's worn cover, thinking about the writer, about the woman who came for her grandmother's stories, about Margaret and his father and all the people who'd passed through his life, leaving marks he's only now beginning to recognize. Has he succeeded in making the world a little less lonely? He wants to believe so. The shop is small, his influence limited to these few square feet and the people who happen to wander in. But perhaps that's enough. Perhaps the measure of a life is not in grand gestures, but in small, repeated acts of attention and care. The smile that welcomes, the book that waits, the willingness to listen when someone needs to be heard. He thinks about the letters again, about a writing to their unknown friend across the distances of time and space. Had they ever met? Or had their friendship existed only in words? Did it matter? The correspondence had survived long after both were gone, carrying their thoughts forward into a future they'd never see, touching someone Thomas himself they'd never know. Perhaps that's the real magic of books, of writing the way they allow people to escape the boundaries of their own moment, to reach across decades and touch someone in a future they can't imagine. We're not as alone as we think. Even now, even here, there are invisible connections that sustain us. The dead still speak, if we're willing to listen. The absent still offer comfort. And loneliness, that constant companion we all carry us. Perhaps less about being alone, and more about forgetting that we're part of something larger. The clock strikes 10, the sound echoing softly through the shop. Thomas stands, marking his place in the book with a scrap of ribbon. He'll read the letters again tomorrow, more slowly, paying attention to details he might have missed. But for now, it's time to close up and go home. He moves through his nightly routine, checking that the fire is safely banked, turning down the lamps one by one, making sure the back door is bolted. Each gesture is familiar, comforting. There's peace in knowing exactly what to do, in having done this thousands of times before, in knowing he'll do it thousands of times again. He puts on his coat and hat, then pauses at the counter where the book of letters rests. On impulse, he picks it up and tucks it under his arm. He wants to keep it close tonight. This collection of words from someone long gone who somehow understood exactly what he needed to hear. He steps outside and locks the door behind him. The bell chimes once a clear note in the stillness. The street is empty, washed clean by the rain. The cobblestones gleam under the gas lamps, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls the hour. Thomas turns up his collar and begins to walk, the book pressed against his side, his footsteps echoing softly off the old stone walls. London at night has its own particular magic. The daytime city is all business and bustle, everyone rushing somewhere, but at night, especially in the old quarters, you can feel the weight of history, the accumulation of all those lives lived here before. It's humbling and comforting at once, the knowledge that you're just one more person in a long chain, that your worries and hopes are part of a larger pattern repeated across centuries. There's comfort in that, in knowing that others have walked these same streets, felt these same lonelinesses, carried these same fears and hopes. We're not as original as we think. Our pains are not unique, and there's something liberating in that realizing that what you feel, countless others have felt too. You're not alone, you never were. The walk home takes 20 minutes. Thomas moves slowly, in no particular hurry. The rain has left everything fresh and clean. Water drips from awnings and windowsills. The air smells of wet stone and coal smoke, urban and alive. A cat crosses the street ahead of him, disappearing into shadow. A window in an upper story shows candlelight, a figure moving behind curtains, life continuing in its quiet ways, unseen and mostly unremarked. The house in Clockenwell is dark when he arrives. Thomas lets himself in, hangs his coat and hat by the door, lights a lamp in the sitting room. The rooms feel cold but familiar. He sets the book of letters on the table beside his chair and goes to the kitchen to make tea. The kettle whistles softly as the water heats. He pours the tea and carries it back to the sitting room, settling into his chair by the window. His reflection looks back at him from the dark, glasser, middle-aged man with grey in his hair and lines around his eyes, ordinary in every way. Margaret had sat across from him in the evenings, in the chair that now stands empty. They'd talk about the day, about Edward, about small plans and smaller observations. Nothing remarkable, but he misses it with an ache that hasn't dulled with time. You don't realize how much the ordinary matters until it's gone the sound of her voice, the way she tilted her head when thinking, the warmth of another presence in the room. These are the things we carry. Not the grand moments, but the small ones. The shared routines, the comfortable silences, the way someone touches your hand in passing. He sips his tea slowly, letting the warmth spread through him. The wind has picked up outside, rattling the windows gently in their frames. He thinks about opening the book again, reading more of A's letters, but finds he's too tired. The day has been long, and tomorrow will bring its own tasks and small satisfactions. Eventually Thomas stands and climbs the stairs to the bedroom. He undresses slowly, moving through the familiar routine, and gets into bed. The sheets are cold at first, but he pulls the blankets close and waits for warmth to build. Rain has begun again outside, soft against the windows. The sound is soothing, ancient. The same rain that has fallen on London for centuries, that will continue falling long after he's gone. There's something comforting in that tin knowing you're part of something that continues. That your small life is woven into a tapestry much larger than you can see or understand. Sleep comes gradually, gently. His mind drifts, thoughts becoming looser, less connected. Images surface and fade the shop, the books, the woman who found her grandmother's stories, the letters written by A to someone they called friend, Margaret's smile, his father standing at the window watching a different rainfall on the same street. All of it real, all of it important, all of it part of something larger than he can fully understand. But perhaps that's the point. Perhaps we don't need to understand. Perhaps it's enough to simply participate, to simply show up, to simply make the small gestures of kindness and attention that we can, and trust that they matter in ways we'll never see. The rain continues through the night, falling on Cornhill, on the Bookshop with its faded gold letters, on churches and houses and the old streets of the city. It falls on everything equally, on past and present, on memory and hope, on the living and the dead. And through it all, London breathes and dreams, ancient and patient, holding its stories close. In the morning, Thomas will wake and return to the shop. He'll unlock the door and light the lamps. He'll help whatever customers come, order new stock, sit by the fire when things are quiet. He'll read more of the letters, Let those words from another time wash over him and remind him that connection is possible, that small gestures matter, that we are all walking through this life together even when we feel most alone. But for now he sleeps, deeply and peacefully, and in the bookshop on Cornhill, surrounded by centuries of stories. The books wait patiently for morning, for whoever will come next to turn their pages and bring them briefly back to life. They're in no hurry. They've learned patience through years of waiting. They know that the right book always finds the right reader, eventually. It's just a matter of time. The night deepens, the city breathes, and in the space between one breath and another, in the silence that holds everything, there is only this, the quiet miracle of another day survived. Another connection made, another small gesture added to the sum total of human kindness that makes this life. For all its difficulty and loss, still somehow bearable, still somehow worth living. Thomas sleeps, the rain falls, London breathes, and sleep, when it comes fully, is deep and dreamless and whole, carrying him gently through the dark hours until morning arrives with its promise of beginning again, of continuing the work, of keeping the doors open and the lights burning for whoever might need them next. The stories can wait. They are patient. They always have been. And they'll always be there on the shelves, holding their words close, ready to offer whatever comfort or recognition or connection someone might need. It's an old promise, a silent covenant between books and readers that has endured for centuries and will endure for centuries more. As long as there are stories, there will be people to read them. As long as there are people, there will be stories to tell. And somewhere, always, there will be quiet places like the bookshop on Cornhill, where these two things can meet and recognize each other, and for a moment make the world a little less lonely, a little more like home. The rain whispers its agreement. The night holds everything gently, and in that holding there is peace.